Guys, you won't believe what I discovered about my neighbor. I'm Ruth, and here on our channel, every day I bring you a new story, a new piece of gossip I see behind the curtains of my house. And today, folks, I have a story that will leave you speechless. I have a neighbor named Don Miguel, a man in his 70s, a longtime widower, and every week, without fail, he goes out with a young woman in his red sports car. And look, when I say young, I mean young. She must be in her early 20s, 30 at most. And you know how I am, right? I can't resist a mystery like that. Now, before I tell you everything I saw, I want to ask you one thing. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. And please, don't leave the video now, because the ending of this story is shocking. I promise you'll be surprised by what I discovered. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's unravel this mystery together. To help you better understand this whole situation, I first need to tell you about my neighborhood. I live on a very quiet street, the kind where everyone has known each other for years. On the right, there's Donna Esperanza, an 80-year-old woman who spends all day on the porch, knitting and observing everything that goes on. On the left, there's the young couple, the Fernandezes, who work all day and only come home at night. Across from my house is Mr. Roberto's family, who have 3 noisy teenage children. And 2 houses to the left is Don Miguel's house. Don Miguel's house is one of the most beautiful on the street. An old, well-kept house with a beautiful garden, always immaculately maintained, with a trimmed lawn and colorful flowers at the entrance. The garage is on the side of the house, and that's where that shiny red car comes from. Don Miguel has always been very careful with his things, a man of well-organized habits. During all my years living here, I always observed Don Miguel's routine. He would wake up early, around 6 in the morning. I always saw him leaving to buy bread at the bakery on the corner, walking slowly, greeting everyone along the way. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would go to the market to do his shopping. On Sundays, he would religiously attend the 8 o'clock Mass at the church downtown. A very regimented, very predictable life. After his wife, Donna Carmen, died 15 years ago, his routine changed a bit. He became more reserved, less sociable. But even so, he was always an exemplary neighbor. He never caused anyone any trouble, always helped out when a neighbor needed it, and always greeted them politely. Donna Carmen was a wonderful woman, a true saint. I knew her well. We were friends. She was a family woman who took care of the house like no one else, and made the best cakes in the neighborhood. Always very elegant, always very polite. They were a very close couple, the kind you'd see walking hand in hand down the street, even after 30 years of marriage. Don Miguel was completely in love with her, treating her like a queen, and she was the same way, always caring, always loving. When Donna Carmen fell ill, it was cancer that appeared out of nowhere. Don Miguel became a dedicated nurse. He took her to the doctors, took care of her medications, prepared special meals, and never left her side for a minute. When she died, he was devastated, completely lost. It all started about 10 weeks ago. It was a typical autumn Thursday, one of those days when the sun is shining but the air is crisp. I was in my kitchen making my afternoon coffee and baking some cookies to take to Donna Esperanza later, when I heard the engine of that car. You know how curious I am, right? So I went to the living room window and peeked through the crack in the curtains. The first thing that caught my attention was that Don Miguel was leaving at an unusual time. Normally, when he left by car, it was early in the morning to run errands or go shopping. But it was 3 in the afternoon, and on a Thursday, he never left at that time. It was a Thursday, around 3 in the afternoon. The sun was shining brightly, one of those days when the heat makes you a little lazy, but I always keep an eye on the neighborhood. The sky was completely clear, a brilliant blue, without a single cloud. The trees along the street were all in bloom because it was spring, and there was that lovely scent of flowers in the air. Don Miguel was leaving the garage in his red car, which shines so brightly it hurts your eyes when the sun hits it. The car was immaculate, as always. Don Miguel always took great care of it, washing it weekly and waxing it frequently. It was one of those old, well-maintained sports cars that made a beautiful noise when started. But what caught my attention wasn't the car, but the person in the passenger seat. A young woman, very young. Light brown hair, shoulder length, the kind of straight, shiny hair young people have. She was wearing those big sunglasses girls wear these days, the kind that cover half their face. Her outfit also caught my attention. She was wearing a very modest, short-sleeved white blouse that looked like cotton or linen, very delicate. Underneath, she wore dark, tight jeans, the kind that show off her figure. On her feet were simple yet elegant white flats. Her bag was small, light brown, slung over her shoulder. Guys, I was instantly intrigued, because you need to understand one thing. Don Miguel has been a widower for about 15 years, so you can imagine my surprise to see him with a young woman like that. And it wasn't a quick visit. It wasn't a casual encounter. The way she was sitting in the car, the naturalness of the situation, made it seem like they were close, that they knew each other well. That first day, I stayed glued to the window until they returned. I even canceled a late afternoon appointment so I wouldn't miss their return. They left around 3:30, and I stood there, staring at the empty street, conjuring up 1,000 theories about who that girl was and what they were doing together. During the 2.5 hours they were gone, I couldn't stop thinking about the situation. I tried to focus on my household chores. I had cake batter to finish, laundry to fold, and phone calls to make, but my mind kept returning to Don Miguel and the mysterious young woman. Was she some distant relative I didn't know? Was she some caregiver the family had hired? But why would a caregiver drive around with him in a sports car? And why was she so well dressed? More like someone going on a date than to work. When they returned at 6 o'clock sharp, I was in a strategic position behind the living room curtain. The sun was already lower, creating that beautiful golden light of late afternoon. The street was busier, with children returning from school and some neighbors watering their gardens. As soon as I heard the engine roar, I ran to the window. The car slowly pulled into the driveway, and I listened closely as they got out. The woman got out of the car a little slowly, as if nervous or tired. She took off her sunglasses, and I could see her face better. She was indeed young, with delicate features, but she had a somewhat sad expression, as if she were worried about something. Don Miguel also got out and walked to her side, offering his arm like a true gentleman. He looked impeccable, as always. A crisply pressed light blue dress shirt, black dress pants, and polished leather shoes. His hair, already quite gray, was styled with gel, and I could even smell his perfume from here when the wind blew in the right direction. They talked for a few minutes there on the sidewalk, very close to each other. I tried to read their lips, but the distance made it impossible to make out anything. What I could make out was their body language. Don Miguel was in a protective posture, leaning slightly toward her. She was gesturing a little, as if she were telling him something that was moving her. What intrigued me most was the expressions on their faces. Don Miguel had a very affectionate smile, you know, that protective way older men have with younger women when they want to show care and affection. His eyes shone in a way I hadn't seen in years, not since before Donna Carmen got sick. And she, oh man, she looked excited. Not crying exactly, but her eyes were shining, as if something important had happened during the trip. She was fidgeting with her hair nervously, fixing the strands that the wind had tousled. Then something happened that intrigued me even more. Don Miguel hugged her, a long, tight hug, and it wasn't one of those quick goodbye hugs. It lasted at least 2 minutes, with him stroking her back, her head resting on his shoulder. During the hug, I saw her whisper something in his ear, and he nodded in agreement. It seemed like an intimate conversation, the kind only very close people have. And when they broke away from the hug, they were both smiling, but their eyes were a little wet with emotion. Then she got into a small car parked nearby, a white, somewhat old economy car, and drove away. Don Miguel stood on the sidewalk waving until she was out of sight, with that silly smile on his face that men in love have. I kept thinking about it all day, and all night too. I couldn't even sleep properly. I kept imagining scenarios, creating theories. Who was that girl? Why did Don Miguel have that look of a man in love? And why did she look so emotional? I tried to remember if I'd seen her before, but I'm sure I hadn't. In 15 years of living on this street, observing everything that happened, I would remember a pretty girl like that. And by Don Miguel's children, I've never seen anyone like her either. Could it be some distant relative who came to visit him? But what young relative could he possibly have? Don Miguel's children are all grown up now. They're my age, in their 50s. I know Carlos, who's an accountant, and Maria, who's a teacher. They're both married, with teenage children. My mind was racing. I started thinking about more, shall we say, romantic possibilities. Could Don Miguel, after 15 years as a widower, have met a younger woman? These things happen, right, girls? An older man, with financial stability and life experience, can indeed attract a younger woman. And let's face it, Don Miguel, for a man in his 70s, is remarkably well preserved. He always takes care of himself, is always well dressed, has a good financial situation, that beautiful house, the car. If he decided to start his love life over again, it wouldn't be a surprise if he found a date. The second week, Thursday again, same time. I was already prepared. I'd even grabbed a small pair of binoculars I have here at home, the kind I got on a field trip years ago. Don't judge me, girls. Curiosity is curiosity, and you'd do the same thing if you were me. I positioned myself strategically at the bedroom window, which offered a better vantage point for observing Don Miguel's house. It was another beautiful day, with a radiant sun and a few scattered white clouds. The weather was cooler than the previous week, typical of the approaching autumn. By 2:45, I was already at my observation post, and at 3 o'clock, sharp, as if on a clock, I heard the roar of his car engine. Don Miguel was pulling out of the garage, but this time I could see the details better because I was prepared. There they were again. This time I got a better look. The girl was wearing a delicate floral dress, predominantly blue and white, that reached her knees. It was very feminine, with a discreet neckline and short sleeves. Over it she wore a thin, light beige cardigan. On her feet were flat brown leather shoes, the kind that's very comfortable for walking. Her hair was different from the week before. It was tied back in a high ponytail, exposing her neck. She wore small gold earrings and a thin chain around her neck. Her bag was different too, larger than the week before, dark brown leather, matching her shoes. She seemed more relaxed than she had the week before, but she still had that nervous air that had caught my attention. She kept fidgeting with her hands, adjusting her dress, and looking around as if she were worried about something. Don Miguel, as always, is a true heartthrob. For a man in his 70s, he takes excellent care of himself. That day he wore a light blue shirt that highlighted his eyes, which are a beautiful grayish blue. His pants were beige and well cut, and he wore brown shoes that perfectly complemented the outfit. His hair, though gray, was always well cut and combed. His beard was also always trimmed, never allowed to grow too long, and he had that erect, elegant posture that some men his age have lost. He was truly attractive for his age. Before they got into the car, something happened that really caught my attention. Don Miguel opened the passenger door for her. So far, so normal. He's always been a gentleman. But before she got in, they chatted for a few minutes next to the car. The conversation seemed serious. He gestured a lot as if explaining something important. She nodded, sometimes in agreement, sometimes seemingly asking questions. At one point, she placed her hand on his arm, a gesture that struck me as very intimate, very affectionate. And then, before she got into the car, they hugged again. A quick hug this time, but still, A hug that lasted longer than a normal hug between people who are just acquaintances. And when they parted, he touched her face. A very tender, very affectionate gesture. They left at 3:15 this time, 15 minutes later than the previous week. And they returned later too, around 6:40. When they got out of the car, the situation was different from the previous week. The girl was smiling. A big smile, the kind you see from afar, and that lights up your entire face. She seemed more confident, more self-assured. When she got out of the car, it was with more agility, without the hesitation of the previous week. Don Miguel was also beaming. He got out of the car with an expression of satisfaction, of mission accomplished. He went straight to her side, and this time, it was she who initiated the hug. She threw herself into his arms enthusiastically, and they embraced, celebrating something. During the hug, I could hear a few stray words carried to me by the wind. "You did it. Well done. Proud." It seemed like she had accomplished something she'd been trying to do for a long time, and he was celebrating with her. And that's when my mind really started working, girls. You know how we women are, right? We put 2 and 2 together and we get 4, 5, 6. I started thinking, are they in a relationship? Is this a May-December romance? But then I thought, Ruth, aren't you exaggerating? Because let's face it, an age difference of almost 50 years is a lot. Although, thinking about it, Don Miguel is a very well-preserved man. He has a good pension, that beautiful house, the car. And who am I to judge love, right? The heart has no age. If they're happy together, if they're not hurting anyone, what's the problem? Maybe it's exactly what Don Miguel needed to live again after so many years alone. Don't leave the video now, girls, because what I discovered will surprise you. The story is just starting to heat up. The third week was when things got more interesting. It was another typical autumn day, but this time it was a bit cloudy, with those gray clouds that make the day feel cooler and more pleasant. The light was softer, more romantic, I'd say. Thursday, same time, same routine, but this time I decided to be smarter. I positioned myself at the upstairs bedroom window, which has a better view of the street and allows me to see more details of his house. And girls, what I saw was spine-chilling. Around 2 in the afternoon, well before usual, I saw Don Miguel in his backyard, washing his car with immense care. He spent over an hour there, washing, sponging, rinsing, and drying with those special cloths he uses. Then he waxed it, a special wax that leaves the car shining like a mirror. Man, that man was preparing the car as if it were for a special date. And what 70-year-old man does that for a friend or relative? That's the stuff of a smitten suitor. He paid attention to every detail, cleaning the tires, spraying the dashboard, vacuuming the seats. After finishing with the car, Don Miguel went into the house and took over half an hour to come out. When he emerged, he was impeccably dressed, more groomed than ever. He'd shaved, his hair was freshly cut, and he was wearing a shirt I'd never seen before. A very elegant burgundy dress shirt that brought out the color of his eyes. His pants were beige linen, well cut, and he wore brown leather shoes that looked new. He even had a distinctive gold watch that gleamed on his wrist. And his perfume. Man, his perfume was stronger than usual. You could smell it from here. When the girl arrived, she didn't come in her own car like other times. She came by ride-hailing app. That's right, girls. One of those small white cars stopped in front of his house, and she got out, and Don Miguel was waiting for her at the door, like a true gentleman in love. He even offered her his hand to get out of the car. And the way he looked at her as she got out, man, it was pure admiration. His eyes shone in a way that only a man in love can. Her outfit that day was also different. More elaborate, more polished. She wore a more elegant navy blue dress with white lace details on the neckline and sleeves. It was a tighter dress, which showed off her truly beautiful figure. On her feet were navy blue leather flats, perfectly matching the dress. Her hair was down this time in neat curls, the kind you get at the salon for special occasions. She wore more elaborate makeup, too. Red lipstick, bold eyes, and blush that gave her face a very natural flush. And the way they greeted each other. Oh man, it was a really long kiss on the cheek, you know. It wasn't that quick little greeting. It was that tender kiss, with his hands on her shoulders, him holding her face with both hands, looking into her eyes. Something a couple in love would do, I'm sure. They stood talking on the sidewalk for about 10 minutes before getting in the car. I was trying to understand what they were saying, but even without hearing the words, their body language didn't lie. They were close, very close. He touched her arm as he talked. She laughed at the things he said, leaned toward him when he responded. When they returned that day, I knew something romantic was going on. They arrived hand in hand. That's right, girls. Don Miguel got out of the car, walked over to her, opened the door like a true prince, offered his hand, and she accepted. And they walked down the sidewalk, hand in hand. They stood there talking for almost half an hour. Very close. He with his hand on her waist, she playing with his hair, arranging it. You know those intimate gestures that only couples do? That's exactly what it was. And at the end, before she left, they kissed. A real kiss, not a goodbye kiss between friends. Guys, I was shocked. Not that I'm against it. Everyone does what they want in life, but I confess I was worried. Because you know how cruel the world is, right? People will talk. They will judge. A man Don Miguel's age with such a young girl. I was already imagining the other neighbors' nasty comments. Donna Esperanza had already asked me a couple of times about Don Miguel's visits, with that tone of someone dying of curiosity but pretending not to care. By the 4th week, I was completely immersed in the story. I confess that Thursday became the most anticipated day of my week. I planned my entire afternoon around watching these two. I even rescheduled a few things so I wouldn't miss the spectacle. That day they arrived together. She'd been in the car with him since morning. I saw them arrive around 10 o'clock. They went into his house together and only left in the afternoon, at their usual time. Girls, they spent the whole day together. If that's not the sign of a serious relationship, I don't know what is. Her outfit was more casual, as if she were truly at home. A simple t-shirt, jean shorts, and her hair down. And Don Miguel was also more relaxed, in a polo shirt and shorts. They looked like a couple at home, you know. When they left for their afternoon stroll, I noticed she was carrying a large briefcase, one of those document briefcases. And that made me even more curious. Were they taking care of paperwork? Maybe a marriage? A will? Was the situation really that serious? During the nearly 4 hours they were gone, I wondered where they'd gone. Had they gone to lunch at a romantic restaurant? To the movies? Or maybe for a walk in a park? And it didn't stop there. When they got home, she didn't leave like the other times. She stayed. At 7 o'clock she was still there. At 8 o'clock, she was still there. I started to wonder. I wonder if she's going to sleep there. Around 9 o'clock, I saw them in his kitchen, making dinner together. I could see through the windows of his house that they were cooking, talking, laughing. They looked like a real couple, you know. She was washing something in the sink. He was stirring something on the stove. Very domestic, very intimate. I started thinking about the whole story. Don Miguel, a widower for 15 years, had always been a very proper man, very family-oriented. Could he really be getting involved with such a young woman? And what would a beautiful young woman like her want with a 70-year-old man? Could it be financial gain? Could she have discovered he's in a good position and is taking advantage? I was starting to get really worried because I like Don Miguel. He's always been a good neighbor, always greeted everyone politely, never caused anyone any trouble. In the 5th week, I decided to investigate a little further. Don't judge me, but I started paying attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed. For example, I noticed that she always arrived a little nervous, a little tense, and she always left more relaxed, more confident. I also noticed that Don Miguel always carried a bottle of water and tissues in the car. Small details, but they caught my attention. Why would a man carry tissues on a romantic date? Unless he's going through some emotional hardship. This week they were gone longer. They left at 3 p.m. and didn't return until 8 p.m., 5 hours away. And when they returned, she was crying again. But it didn't sound like a sad cry, you know? It sounded more like a cry of relief, of good emotion. Don Miguel got out of the car and went straight to hug her. A very tight, protective hug. And they stayed there for about 5 minutes. Just hugging, not talking, not kissing, just hugging. And you know what touched me most? I saw that his eyes were a little wet too. Guys, I started to think that maybe it wasn't just a romance. Maybe it was something deeper, more meaningful. Maybe she was going through a difficult time in her life and he was being a support, a father, a grandfather. In the 6th week, something happened that intrigued me even more. It was a Tuesday, not the usual Thursday. I was watering the plants in the backyard when I heard voices in Don Miguel's house. It was him and the girl, talking in the backyard. I could hear a few stray words. Scared. Can't do it. Try again. It'll work out. Her voice was shaky, a little tearful. His was calm, reassuring. It sounded like a father comforting a daughter, you know. And that's when my mind started working in a different way. Could she be his girlfriend? Could she be his daughter? But what daughter? I know Don Miguel's sons. They're all older men. But then I remembered the kisses, the holding of hands. Granddaughters don't kiss their grandfather on the mouth. At least they shouldn't. I was confused, very confused. This week, when they went on their usual Thursday outing, I noticed other details. For example, her posture in the car. She was always looking straight ahead, very focused. Her hands were always gripping the seat or the door. She looked nervous or scared. And Don Miguel was always talking, gesturing, as if he were explaining something. He looked more like a teacher teaching than a boyfriend hanging out with his girlfriend. Guys, leave a comment with your thoughts on this story. I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Is it romance? Is it family? What would you do in my shoes? In the 7th week, I had a partial revelation. It was a rainy Thursday, one of those days when the weather turns gray and dreary. I was in the kitchen baking a cake when I saw them arriving, but this time, instead of getting straight into the car, they stayed in the garage. The garage door was open, and I could see they were doing something with the car. Don Miguel was showing her something, pointing at the dashboard, fiddling with the mirrors. And suddenly it clicked. They were taking driving lessons. She was learning to drive. That's why she was nervous. That's why she was scared. That's why Don Miguel was always explaining things. But it still didn't explain the kisses, the holding of hands, all that intimacy that I had observed. They went out even in the rain. And when they came back, she was beaming, a smile from ear to ear. They hugged, celebrating something. And I thought, she must have managed something in the traffic she was afraid of. By the 8th week, I was determined to find out the truth. I couldn't stand my curiosity any longer. So I came up with a plan. On Thursday, I would pretend I was leaving somewhere at the same time as them and try to strike up a conversation with Don Miguel. At 3 in the afternoon, I was on the sidewalk, pretending to wait for a ride-hailing service. When Don Miguel got out with the girl, I waved at him. He stopped the car and rolled down the window. "Hi, Don Miguel. How are you?" I said, approaching the car. "Hi, Mrs. Ruth. How are you? How are you?" "Everything's great. And who's this pretty girl?" I asked, looking at her. She blushed, a little embarrassed. Don Miguel smiled and said, "Ah, it's Isabella, my granddaughter." Granddaughter. I knew it. But then he continued, "She's learning to drive with me." "That's cool. How old are you, honey?" I asked her. 23, she replied in a small voice. "Wow, and why are you only learning now?" I asked, being a bit indiscreet indeed. She turned even redder, and Don Miguel answered for her. "It's a complicated story, Mrs. Ruth, but now she's managing to get over it." "Overcome what?" I asked, but Don Miguel was already rolling up the window. "We'll talk more another time. Bye, Mrs. Ruth." And they left, leaving me even more curious than before. Granddaughter? But what kind of granddaughter was that I had never seen? And why was she so afraid of driving? And those little kisses I had seen? Had I imagined it all? By the 9th week, I began to see things differently. If she really was my granddaughter, perhaps the little kisses I'd seen were just affectionate family kisses. Maybe the hand-holding was just emotional support. Maybe I'd been misreading everything from the start. But still, one thing bothered me. Why had I never seen her before? Don Miguel had lived there for over 20 years, and I had never seen this granddaughter. This week, they arrived earlier than usual, around 2 in the afternoon, and I noticed she was carrying a small suitcase. Was she going to travel? Was she going to move there? When they went out to drive, I noticed that this time she was in the driver's seat. She was the one driving. Don Miguel was in the passenger seat, probably giving her directions. What progress! If she was really learning to drive, she must have progressed enough for Don Miguel to let her drive on the street. They returned after 2 hours, and when they got out of the car, she was crying with emotion. This time I was sure it was tears of joy. Don Miguel hugged her, and she whispered something in his ear that made him smile. Had she managed to drive alone for the first time? Had she overcome some fear? In the 10th week, something happened that changed everything. It was a Wednesday, and I was sweeping the sidewalk when a car arrived at Don Miguel's house. A man and a woman, both in their early 40s, got out. They had keys to the house. They were Don Miguel's children. I recognized Carlos, the oldest, and Maria, the youngest. It had been a while since I'd seen them there. And then, a few minutes later, Isabella arrived. But this time she drove, alone. She parked the car in front of the house with some difficulty, but she did. When she got out of the car, the others came out of the house. And then I saw a scene that moved me to tears. Don Miguel, Carlos, Maria, they all ran to hug Isabella. It was a party. Everyone was crying with emotion, hugging each other, celebrating. And that's when I heard Maria shouting, "I knew you could do it. Daddy was right to insist." Daddy? Don Miguel was Maria's father, not Isabella's grandfather. So Isabella was granddaughter. Granddaughter indeed. Daughter of Carlos or Maria. But why all the fuss about learning to drive? Why had I never seen her before? Subscribe to the channel, girls, because you need to know the end of this story. If you subscribe, you'll get notified when I post new videos. And like the video too. It helps me a lot. By the 11th week, I couldn't take it anymore and decided to go talk to Maria, who had stayed at her father's house after the visit. I knocked on her door on Saturday morning, asking to borrow a cup of sugar. "Hi, Maria. How are you?" "Hi, Mrs. Ruth. Everything's great. It's so good to see you here. What about that pretty girl who was here last week?" "Ah, Isabella. She's my daughter." Maria's daughter. So she really was Don Miguel's granddaughter. Wow, she's beautiful, but I've never seen her around here. Maria became a little serious and said, "It's a complicated story, Mrs. Ruth. She lived with her father in another state, but some things happened." She stopped talking, as if she didn't want to continue. But I'm persistent. "What kind of things?" I asked, feigning concern. "Her parents died in a car accident 2 years ago," Maria said softly. "She was in the back seat, the only one who survived. Ever since then, she's been terrified of cars. She couldn't even get into one." Wow, now everything was starting to make sense. Her parents had died in a car accident, and she was traumatized. "Wow, that's terrible," I said, truly shocked. "That's right. She came to live with me a few months ago, but she was very depressed. She didn't leave the house, didn't work, didn't do anything. That's when my father offered to help her overcome her fear of driving. What a wonderful father. He really is. He had infinite patience with her. He started by just showing her the car parked in the garage, then sitting inside without turning it on, then turning it on without moving. It was a long and painful process. Now I understood everything. Her nervousness, her fear, her tears, Don Miguel's protective embraces. It wasn't romance. It was therapy. It was a loving grandfather helping his granddaughter overcome a terrible trauma. And now she's able to drive herself? I asked. She did it. Last week she drove alone for the first time since the accident. We all cried with emotion. It was a huge victory. Man, I was feeling terrible. I had imagined a forbidden romance where in reality there was a story of family love, of overcoming, of emotional healing. And the hugs I saw them giving? I asked, still trying to understand. My father hugged her whenever she made some progress, and also when she had panic attacks, which were frequent in the beginning. He was like a father to her, you know? The father she lost. Now everything fell into place. The kisses I thought were romantic were kisses of familial affection. The hand-holding was emotional support. The walks were driving lessons to help her overcome the trauma. I felt like an idiot, a stupid gossip who had created an entire soap opera in her head. But at the same time, I felt moved, because the real story was far more beautiful than any romance I could have imagined. It was a true love story, but a family love, a grandfather's love, unconditional love, Maria continued. Isabella lost her parents in a terrible accident. She was driving home from college with them when a drunk driver hit their car head-on. She was in a coma for 2 weeks, had several surgeries, and spent months in physical therapy. My God, how horrible. When she woke up from her coma and learned that her parents had died, she fell into a deep depression. She didn't want to know anything. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't leave her room. The doctors said that, in addition to the emotional trauma, she developed a phobia of cars. Poor thing. She came to live with me 6 months ago, but she was in a really bad way. She couldn't even walk near a car without having a panic attack. That's when my father, Don Miguel, had the idea of helping her gradually. Like this? He started by just taking her to sit in the car parked in the garage. The first day, she lasted 5 minutes and left crying. But he didn't give up. Every day, a little more, until she was able to stay in the car, running, parked. I was getting emotional with the story. Don Miguel really was a hero. Then he started taking short walks around the block, very slowly, always talking to her, calming her down. It took months for her to be able to relax a little in the car. And now she can drive herself? She did it! It was a battle that lasted almost a year. My father had infinite patience. Sometimes she would have a panic attack in the middle of class and they would go home. Other times she would cry the whole class out of fear. But he never gave up on her. What a wonderful grandfather. He really is. And you know what? Since he started helping Isabella, he's had a purpose in life again. After my mother died, he was very depressed too. Helping Isabella overcome the trauma was therapy for him too. Now I understood everything completely. The joy I saw in Don Miguel's eyes wasn't that of a man in love. It was that of a proud grandfather watching his granddaughter overcome a terrible trauma. And the intimacy between them wasn't romantic. It was the special affection that forms when two people go through such a difficult and emotional process together. Isabella will start work next week, Maria continued. She got a job at a company close to home. Being able to drive has completely changed her life. She can smile again. She can have hope for the future again. What a beautiful story. It really is. And it's all thanks to my dad. He literally saved my daughter's life. By the 12th week, I saw them with new eyes. Now I saw what was really happening. A 70-year-old man, with the patience of a saint, helping his traumatized granddaughter rebuild her life. I watched him calmly explain every traffic move, how he held her hand when she got nervous at the traffic light, how he celebrated her every small victory, parking between 2 cars, parallel parking, driving in the rain. And I thought about how often we women create stories in our heads based on superficial observations. How often we judge situations without understanding the context. How much gossip is born this way, from misinterpretations of reality. Don Miguel wasn't having an affair with a young woman. He was being his own family's hero. He was being the grandfather every traumatized granddaughter wishes she had. He was healing the wounds a terrible accident had left in the soul of a 23-year-old girl. And you know what touched me most? Discovering that there are still men like Don Miguel in the world. Men who dedicate time, patience, and love to healing the people they love. Men who don't give up, even when the process is long and painful. Isabella now drives alone. She got a job at a company near her home. She's smiling again, living again, and all thanks to the patience and love of her grandfather, Don Miguel. During all these months of observing them, I learned an important lesson. Things are not always what they seem. Sometimes our imagination creates stories very different from reality, and sometimes reality is much more beautiful than any story we can invent. I imagined a forbidden romance, a scandalous age difference, a self-serving young woman taking advantage of a lonely elderly man. In reality, it was a story of family love, of overcoming obstacles, of healing. It was a devoted grandfather helping his traumatized granddaughter get back to life. The last time I saw them together, Isabella was driving, and Don Miguel was in the passenger seat, beaming with pride. They stopped in front of the house, got out of the car, chatting animatedly, and she kissed him on the cheek. A kiss of affection, of gratitude, of familial love. Don Miguel entered the house with that smile on his face, the same smile I had mistakenly interpreted as the smile of a man in love. In reality, it was the smile of a grandfather who had managed to give his granddaughter back the confidence to live. And Isabella headed to work, driving alone, confident, free from the trauma that had imprisoned her for so long. A 23-year-old woman who lost everything in a terrible accident, but found in her grandfather's love the strength to start over. So, girls, that's the story I had to tell you today. A story that taught me that things aren't always what they seem. That sometimes reality is much more beautiful than any gossip we can make up. That sometimes when we see an older man with a younger woman, it's not romance. It could be a father helping a daughter, a grandfather saving a granddaughter, a mentor transforming a life. That family love is as powerful as romantic love, and sometimes even more beautiful. Don Miguel taught me that it's never too late to have a purpose in life. That even at 70, widowed and alone, he found a mission to heal his granddaughter's wounded heart. And in the process, he also healed his own heart, which had been empty since Donna Carmen's death. Isabella taught me that it's possible to overcome even the most terrible traumas when we have the support of the right people. That with patience, love, and dedication, it's possible to rebuild a life that seemed lost. And I learned that before judging, before creating theories, before spreading gossip, it's important to know the whole story, because behind every situation that seems strange or questionable to us, there can be a beautiful story of love, resilience, and family. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know what you thought of this story in the comments. Have you ever been in a similar situation? Have you ever created stories in your head that you later discovered were completely different? And don't forget to watch the next video I'll recommend here, where I tell the story of the neighbor who received strange packages every week, and what I discovered will shock you. Until next time, girls.